Welcome everyone, I'm Chris Dobbin and I'm welcoming you to the ultimate live on the powerful brand in today's digital age called Amplify Your Brand. And I'm here with my fellow colleague and branding expert Samoa here, and we're here to share the expertise and help you take your brand to the next level. So whether you're an entrepreneur, small business owner, a marketing professional, someone who's trying to tinker around with that personal brand, we're here to unpack the practical insights and strategies that can help you amplify your brand in this digital landscape. So ready to take notes. Let's take what we do today and put it into action, because by the end of this live stream, you'll have a clear roadmap of how to build your brand that truly resonates with your target audience. So thank you for joining us today, and let's find another way to amplify your brand. And today's topic is going to be all about an interesting one close to Sim's heart, the art of typography, from history to the brand voice. So whether you're designing a logo, a website, or any other piece of branding, remember that the typography is more than just letters, it's the voice of the brand. And I'm going to pass this back to you, Sim, and just give us a little bit more of an insight into what that actually means.
Well, let's play a game, shall we? Yeah. Imagine you walk into a supermarket and you close your eyes and you look around the aisles and you see nothing. And that's the importance of typography in today's day and age. Typography goes hand in hand with visuals. It has become a visual itself, and it does a lot more than just convey information. It charges that information with the decision features that allow us to form our opinions. When we buy a product based on a package, it is because something in it told us something that the other product next to it did not. So typography and visuals, when properly put together, they create a much more complete message of what a product or a brand really mean to. So that's the introduction for today's session.
Yeah, we did touch a little bit on this in other episodes too, by the way. So if you want to go back and check some of those episodes, you will learn a little bit more of insights, but we're going to go a little deeper and be more specific today about typography. But you will see how we've talked about typography in the broader scope of branding in other episodes. So please go check those out. But before we get into that, what I want to talk to you today about is the fact that everything we get into is part of our P8 branding program or framework. And where we are going to focus today is in the persona part. That's where the recent episodes we've been talking about. This series is all around the persona of your brand, and the elements that make up a visual identity have been the key focus of what we do. Even though visual identity is only one aspect of branding, it is an important part, and one that, because it's visual, most people understand and will hopefully comprehend what we talk about on a regular basis over the next couple of weeks. So I'll leave this to you, Sim, to talk to the screen about what this is all about.
Maybe some of us have heard about this fella called Johannes Gutenberg. Taking a trip back in time to the origins of typography, Gutenberg's press to the digital age made typography evolve and shape it in the way that we communicate visually. It's fascinating how typography was initially restricted to physical forms and how it now transitioned into a digital realm. If you think that typography started with literal metal blocks that were lined up together in a rail made of wood and created the first blocks of news, you all of a sudden appreciate and have a sense of how long or how far typography has come to the point of today. All we have to do is use our little fingers and type whatever message we want, select the font, and there it goes. This was not the case in the 1500s. This Mr. Gutenberg went through a whole lot of trouble to create one simple word, one simple sentence. And the first iterations of typography meant that somebody spent copious amounts of hours putting together that word that we saw printed somewhere.
And when you talk about printing too, I mean, we had the what did you call it? The town crier or whatever would go, hear ye, some news is going on. They held up a bit of paper, and the reason they were doing that is because to replicate that piece of paper was so difficult that they had to kind of just find somewhere central and shout out loud as much as they could. And obviously you're talking about printing. And, I guess you've got a great graphic here, which we'll talk to on the screen here. So this
Yeah.
particular device. I'm going to talk through what this is on the screen. For those that ever get to see this on our podcast in the future, when we talk further about this, we'll refer to this and we'll provide links in the notes on what we're talking to on the screen. But over to you, Sim.
Yeah, so from the technical standpoint, the blocks of metal had imprinted in reverse the letter forms on them. So back then, font was not much of a consideration because the amount of work necessary to melt metal into a shape of a letter and then create an entire alphabet in different sizes so that you could create a major headline and then a body copy and format it into a layout, all by literally pressing these metal types onto a sheet of paper, just involved so much work that it's inconceivable to almost try to grasp that entire notion. But the fact is that typography shaped culture as we know it, and it became a tool for evolution. Without typography, we wouldn't promote literacy. We wouldn't educate as we do in the formats that we do today. And regardless of how information is managed these days, the fact is that typography played a fundamental role in how we interpret the world around us, how we perceive information, and how that information is now relate to us under different tones. And today's session is about understanding how to achieve the modulation of information in the written form.
Yeah. I mean, if I mention Times Square in New York, instantly you can see in your mind, everyone's seen it, those flashing lights, the signage, the logos, the graphics that are put up there. But what's more important about that is it's not just the colors and things which we're going to talk about next week that make this whole thing come together. It's the fact that those little letters that are showing up that communicate to you words is what you're receiving. But what most people don't really think about is the different font sets that are on those signs that are either giving each sign its own personality or a way to communicate with you. And even if you walk down a street, any retail street these days, like signage is everywhere. And
Correct.
It's got everything from blackboards in chalk where people are writing on it to texters to then signage that is literally communicating either come inside to our store, or we are a fashion label, or we are a beer, we are a pub, whatever the case be. There is clear ways that these things are communicated so that you know instantly, just something in your DNA says that is a particular type of store. And usually it's not the graphics that are doing it, it's the typography choices that are being made that get you in there. But
absolutely.
We're going to go through
a pub. Yes, just to complement what you said exactly there, because it's one of those we don't even become aware of the messaging. So the pub, to advertise the happy hour, they'll probably chalk something up on a blackboard and stick it outside. But if you walk past a Zara shop or a Louis Vuitton shop, the lettering they chose has been designed and planned to achieve a certain tone of voice. It's been cut out, maybe in laser, maybe in vinyl, maybe whatever the shape it was cut out was. It speaks in a very different language than what chalkboard "come get a beer" does. And that intonation under the typographic realm is the most interesting aspect of today's talk.
Yeah, for sure. Unfortunately, I didn't print out the cheat notes, so we're going to fly it by the ear of what it comes onto the screens, my friend. So is there anything else you want to talk about this part?
No, not now. We'll get into it later.
All right, so let's get into the first topic of today, which is know your audience. So choosing typography that resonates with your target audience, consider the preferences and expectations. Based on your brand's personality and values, are you aiming for the modern, classic, playful, or elegant vibe? This is the foundation that will guide your font choices. And this is where I'm going to hand it back to Sim, because when we go through this with our clients, this is one of the things you firstly love doing. It's a passion you have, but secondly to that, it's an important part you go through with our clients to make them understand why this matters.
So it absolutely does matter, because like we just focused on a quick couple of examples. The way you speak from a pub is not the same way you speak from inside a fashion shop. And knowing who your audience is, meaning understanding the persona or the ideal client that you want to attract into your shop or company or business, will have everything to do with understanding how the typography needs to adapt to that. Now, this first step is just a statement of what needs to happen. The next step is basically understanding how that choice is going to be made. Let's jump into step number 2, Chris.
Oh, really? Okay. All right. Well, let's move forward. So there you go. Choose a typeface. Okay. Decide whether you want a sans serif or a display font. Each category brings a different feel. So again, talk me through. Like, I think a lot of people don't understand the difference. So.
Correct. We are in this environment. We have been for years, so it's something that we almost forget that we know. But basically, you have two main categories of typefaces. And when I say typefaces, I'm replacing that word with font, because font is technically not what we usually address as fonts. But for the purpose of this conversation, I'm going to use the typeface expression when I refer to font. Basically, there are two main categories of typefaces. There are the serifs and the non-serifs. Relating the serifs back to history, it was found that the serifs, being those little squiggles at the top and the bottoms of the letters, like your T's, like your R's, like your A's, those little indicators, they facilitate reading to a point where the written information has been proven to be up to 25% more efficient when you use serif typefaces. So that is one main category. The second category is the sans serif, which is devoid of these features and more optimized for simple minimalistic characters. But they also lend themselves to be better read on screens, so digital. Knowing the difference between one and the other will help you clarify what needs to happen in terms of contrast, because contrast will be very important, and we'll focus on that on the next few steps. But understanding this difference will help you make choices based on the previous step of knowing your audience and speaking to them in a way that makes sense. Agree, Chris?
I totally agree, and that's why if we know also the age group of different groups, you will notice it, and we have joked about in the previous episode about Comic Sans.
Comic Sans, yes.
Comic Sans, when you're talking to kids, is a fantastic font. Kids love that font because it looks like a crayon or someone's drawn with a pen. And it feels like it's very handwritten, but not quite handwritten, and looks fun. So when it comes to, say, a kid's party invite, that could be a great scenario. But if it's a party invite, such as like if it's a more formal type of party, which might be a christening or I don't know, something to do with the mum side of things, you would maybe choose a more elegant, more female font to attract the other mums and the other adults that might be coming to that event. So there's differences in those font choices that help that understanding. Obviously, this is an informal version of this. When it comes to what we deal with most times as corporate or a business scenario, this font choices, clearly knowing your audience and then knowing the typefaces will affect the outcome. Because some industries that we work in, you're going to instantly take them down a certain pathway because serif and sans serif is going to be sort of decided by those industries because of how the fonts are used in the majority of the either the logo or the typefaces that it requires. And we've had another number of clients that when digital wasn't important to them, they didn't use those fonts. But then when they started to have to become social media friendly, some of those typefaces really did age or date and didn't work effectively. We've had many circumstances
on spot, Chris. Absolutely right. That's exactly it. And the interesting part about the serifs is in the sans serif conversation is that once you understand that, and you look at other fonts that may look cool, may look interesting to you, and they don't necessarily fall into those two main categories, it's okay. Just know that those are the main dividers that separate fonts in kind. There are many other subdivisions, and we can talk about just two of them to make things easier for everybody listening to this today. We have our scripted fonts, which are the calligraphic, or the ones that replicate the movement of the hand when we're writing. That is the scripted, that is the calligraphic style, that is the cursive. These are all names that are associated to typefaces that do tend to imitate the way of the cursive writing. So they have a slant, they have a diagonal character to them, because we usually tend one way or the other when we write. We're not machines, and therefore everything that we carry inside our brains makes us put information in the written format in a specific way. And we have also the display category. Display category is basically all types that do a really spectacular job of saying something out loud very, very shortly. I'm talking about fonts like Impact, for example. I'm talking about fonts like American Captain, for example. They're usually very strongly bodied. They have a very visual presence, but the moment you try to create a paragraph in that specific font, they become a detriment to readability. So when you're looking at fonts and you really like to use one, just because you like it, because you were drawn to it, doesn't mean you should write your entire mission statement or your communication materials should adopt that font. So again, to recap this segment, we have serifs, we have sans serifs, we have display, and display are usually very, very well suited for headlines, and we've got the cursives. And I'll leave it at that for now.
I think we've covered that topic well and truly. So let's get to the third part of this, which is selecting primary and secondary fonts. So choosing a primary font for headings, which we just touched on there, and a secondary font for body text. So these fonts should be complementing to each other. So pairing for harmony. There are serif and sans serif fonts, each with their distinct characteristics. Serif fonts exclude tradition and elegance, while sans serif fonts bring a modern, clean feel. We'll also touch on scripts and display fonts, which is added personally and flair to branding, which we've obviously just touched on. So you were jumping ahead. It's good to see we're back in old form. But what we haven't touched on, what we haven't touched on here is what you sort of highlighted there. So I run a sorry, I don't run. I'm one of my clients is a man-orientated foundation for charity type fonts. We use Impact for headings because of that exact reason. It's very masculine, and that because we're targeting the males, that worked really well. But clearly, what I learned very quickly when I was developing that brand was that I couldn't use Impact for the body font of that because it just kept shouting. Like it was constantly like, you are, and it's like, well, this is not going to work. Had to choose a complementary font for that. And that was a great example for me to illustrate that a heading font can be clearly identified because it's impactful. In short, sharp messaging, it's fantastic. As soon as you get into a long form, it starts to lose the impact. And that should instantly illustrate to you when you're developing your brand with us that should be obvious that font's great for headings, but not so great for a body font, long
body
form.
copy application. Yes.
Yeah.
So thank you for bringing that example. It's a very easy one to relate to. Impact is the best font that I can speak to right now for the reasons that you brought up, Chris. Because from a technical standpoint, the Impact speaks to men because it's very bulky. It's very strong. It's got very little space in between the. I want to call it anatomy. And if you look closely at typography in the same way that we have obsessively been doing for over 20 years, you will find the key characteristics between a display font and a body copy font make it that they are very good at what they do, but very, very incompetent at something else. So Impact, when you reduce the font impact and apply it to an entire paragraph in small sizes, you will notice that even if you print that paragraph, the body of the font makes it almost impossible to read because the ink itself is so close to one another that your eyes see no differentiation from one side of the letter to the next side of the letter to the next letter. And this spacing starts becoming a burden for the eyes. Your retina actually starts feeling tired. This is interesting because typography affects at the most fundamental level how we interpret information. We started today's session with that. I'm going to keep reinforcing it as we come to the conclusion. You will notice that the serif fonts and the sans serif fonts are very useful, and this is why we're talking about selecting the primary and secondary fonts, because once you realize and are able to distinguish the clearly display type fonts from the non-display fonts, your job just becomes easier because you rule out a number of options for that secondary font. And you'll notice by our slides, you'll notice by the posts we put out, you'll notice by newspapers around you, you'll notice by magazines. The moment you start noticing at the font used on the headlines and the font used for the body copy, which is the running text, the paragraphs, the bulk of the information, you'll immediately start realizing how typography needs to be how it is used.
Yeah. Helvetica is probably the one font that comes to mind that breaks all the rules because it can be used as headings and body text. But what changes that is the
size. And with that, we're jumping to the next section.
Am I? There you go. That's what I say. I need the cheat sheets in front of me. So I guess, well, unless you've got anything else to talk about the selecting of primary and secondary fonts, is there more to that behavior that you want to talk about?
No, I'll leave it at this because we're pinging on the next slide there, and you can carry on talking about
So embracing the hierarchy and the variation. So create hierarchy in font sizes and weights. That's the word I was looking for. Weights. Use a bolder or larger font for heading and lighter one for the subheading or body text. A different weight for testimonials, verbatims, usually italics. Use a specific weight for captions. This guides readers through your content. So I was getting a little bit ahead of myself. So nice pick up on that one, Sim. Because, like as I was just about to touch on with Helvetica, you use it in a heading, but you wouldn't use it in its standard format. You would put a different weight on it. So make it bolder, extra bold, that kind of thing for like what I was talking about with the impact font. It's literally for impact using Helvetica, which is a really great font. And once you know what Helvetica is, you can't unsee it in every signage or every major corporation brochure or ad that you've ever seen, because it's so commonly used when it comes to the higher level corporates. They are gradually learning that everyone's using it where there's no differentiation. So we need to find a different font to help us stand out. And because of digital age, that's becoming more and more available to them. But it is quite interesting how certain fonts, as long as you've got weights on them, and this is something you go through with our process with our clients, is you don't generally just say, hey, here's a great font. You usually make clear to them that, by the way, this font's a good font because of its family of weights that it has, and that gives us versatility.
Hence the brilliance of the example you brought up, Chris, because Helvetica is a very and I will open a quick remark here just to make sure that everybody knows we designers, we creative people can be extremely arrogant about the use of Helvetica, because it has become sort of a running joke, but nevertheless an assumption that if you're a designer, you know Helvetica and you know how to use Helvetica in an entire document using only that one font. And Chris mentioned the weights. Well, this is exactly why Helvetica is such a brilliant font, because being designed by Swiss typographers, they are very, very technical about how they go about building an entire family. When I say family, we're not just talking about the usual 4 weights. Usual is the regular, the bold, the italic, and there could be a light version. So we have 4 weights in very complete families of typefaces. Helvetica burns that book completely and goes way past the dozen weights. That's how complete and how developed the entire family of the Helvetica typeface has been created and developed and used over the years. Like Chris said, once you get to know Helvetica, and you don't see the Arial anymore, you get into Helvetica areas, you will know that that you're in the presence of that fantastic font. And the hierarchy here is key. It's key because, again, you want to use one font, but you still want to make sure that you have enough distinction between the size of the headlines, the weight, and all the way down to body copy, to captions, to testimonials, and the different variations in those weights make all the difference in you being able to read correctly. And Helvetica, again, is just it's just the designer's cliche dream of usage for typeface.
Do you have any rules when it comes to the hierarchy of like heading, subheading, body text, calls to action? So is there anything you use as a thumb rule?
Yes. A rule of thumb is very easy to follow. You multiply by 2 as you go up in scales, and you start with the smallest readable type possible in a document. So we're talking about, probably this is going to be the caption of an image. And many times that caption of that image may need to be put in a bar of a reversed color, usually a black, or something that creates enough contrast that when that type goes to white, the ink absorbs into the printed paper and it still holds readability. I got very technical there. I'm sorry. I love this area, but you start with the smallest size in mind. And for most people, that would be a size 6. You duplicate that by rule of thumb, and you get to a body copy size. You duplicate that, you get to a sub headline. You duplicate that, and you get to a headline. Now, the ratios will work differently according to the ergonomy of certain typefaces. This is the rule of thumb. Start at 2, but if you want to be really comfortable for contrast purposes and create a very distinct look of the headline and the body copy, multiply it by 4. You'll still be fine. You'll just need to accommodate for the space in the layout for it. But multiply by 4 and start on the lower level. You'll keep going up. That's the rule of thumb.
Cool. All right. Well, then hopefully someone can apply that. And if you don't want to, come to us. We'd love to have a chat with you about how we apply it to your brand. Which leads to another reason why we love working with our clients, is because consistency is a key. So we'd love to stick to a consistent set of fonts across all your brand touch points. This builds brand recognition and reinforces your brand identity. So we encourage you to test and use selected fonts consistently across all the brand material, from whether it's your website, social media, packaging, business cards. Consistency builds that brand recognition. So this is something that a lot of clients, I guess, struggle with. Especially,
yes.
Especially when they say bring on a new staff member, or they have to hand documents down to team members and things like that. People are people, and if people don't understand what a brand is, they'll just check any random font and they'll just put it into a document and send it out. So I've seen this many times, especially. And what's quite interesting about this is PowerPoint presentations, because some people don't embed the PowerPoint and then they give it to somebody to put it on PowerPoint on their computer, and then they put it on the screen, and the formatting goes out of whack.
Fonts broke.
Yeah, whatever. And the important part about this is, even if it doesn't break, it's just the look doesn't communicate what the brand's intention was on that PowerPoint slide, as one example. Another one that could be even more, and I've had this happen, where a print job went to the printer and the fonts weren't embedded in the PDF, and when they opened up the file, it converted. Fortunately, in that project, I had a step in there to sign off on the print before it went to print, and we stopped it before it went there. But there are times when that could have just gone straight to print and the person would have received it back.
And poof, bye-bye, thousands of dollars.
Exactly. So
Yes.
really, really the importance of understanding this, because the thing about doing this consistently, and the thing about branding, we have touched on this in many of the other previous episodes about consistency, is by being
Bingo.
consistent with your fonts, people get used to seeing it next to all the other assets that you have that make your brand, and it just builds that
Yeah.
story. And it's kind of like a moment. You just go, hang on, I've seen that font before. I've seen those elements.
Yeah.
I know who
Yeah.
this is, and I feel comfortable. I think I'll trust what I'm about to read, because that font
Very.
it's something you've seen before. It's like an old friend, an old pal. It's that kind
You certainly recognize the tone of voices of certain people in your life without having to look at them. If your best friend comes from behind and he says something to you, you identify the tonality, you identify the inflection of the expressions that he uses. This is what typography does at a visual level. It creates that identification. And like Chris said, from the start, we have 18, 19 sessions now. We've always harped on a few key points. Consistency is the key point that he just mentioned again. Technically, in history, consistency may not have always been the easiest to maintain. I'm talking about the early times of smartphones. The first, basically black and white 16-bit phones that we had could not replicate all the fonts. Today, that is no longer the case. Every screen, everywhere we look at, there is very likely the degree of technology that enables certain consistency to be met. When we
of.
create something from a brand perspective and then we try to implement it with the intention of having that identification and recognition be hit every time, this is something that we also talk about. Brand does only complement sales when you identify it, when you create enough trust factors that the sale can then be considered by the end user. So deconstructing this back into the simplest forms and relating it, tying it back to what Chris just said, it's creating that trust and creating that recognition by usage, consistent usage of the same fonts, and preferably in the same hierarchy schemes. So we talked about duplicating a size for caption and duplicating again for body copy and duplicating again for headline. If you're able to maintain that relationship and transpose it to a screen on the palm of your hand, put it on a newspaper article, put it on a TV, you're creating the elements of recognition necessary for your brand to be identified over and over again. In fact, this is one of the fire tests, the acid tests that we recommend some of our clients to do, which is you'll be very amazed at this one, because last week we talked about all the importance of the logo. Well, here it is. Take the logo off your piece of communication and run it past your audience. Is it still identifiable? If it isn't, you've got work to do. If it is, home run, let's all celebrate. So recognition achieved by way of consistency. Very good point there, Chris, and well done on emphasizing that on this particular slide.
Compliments back at you at hitting a home run on bringing it all together. So well done. Alrighty. On bringing it home, the coffee cup moment. So typography is an art that carries history, categorisation, and brand voice within its curves and lines. It's a silent communicator that breaks volumes about your brand's personality. Whether you're designing a logo, a website, or any other piece of branding, remember that typography is more than just letters. It's the voice of your brand. So I guess what we've really tried to highlight here, and I think you just illustrated that in your last session there with the taking away the logo off any of your collateral, does that still resonate with the end communication target audience that we're trying to get to? That even if your logo came off, would it still be recognizable as your brand? And typography, as we're going to touch on next week's and with colors, and we've talked about in last week's episode about the other graphical elements that come together. If you take the logo off, you should still be able to recognize that this is part of that brand's family, and it's part of them. And it should also communicates something. And when it comes to branding, it's creating an emotional response. And that's what these fonts should do. And that's why we're saying when we select a font for you to help you with your brand, it's because it's going to resonate with that emotion that we've developed in the branding exercises. It says, hey, if you use these font sets, it will do this. People will humanely respond to it. And remember, we are talking to humans here. So we really don't care whether the cat, the dog, or the cow see your font and how they respond to it, because they unfortunately don't pull out the checkbook or the ATM card or the digital transfer of money to your account. So please remember, we're talking about humans when we talk about this. And it's universal. Humans, no matter what culture they come from, generally have a certain response to certain things. Now, there is definitely circumstances where that is not true, and there is certain things that if you use a certain way, it will respond an emotional response. But that again comes back to what we talked about at the very beginning, understanding your target audience. So if you have a niche within the niche, then of course we may look at adjusting that font set to target that niche. But in a general sense, you have a customer like avatar that we're trying to approach, or a general feeling you're trying to get across to that target audience. Font sets, hopefully today, have illustrated the importance of that. And I'll hand it to you, Sim, for any closing comments and things you want to talk about today, because we've done well and we've come to the wrapping of typography, what it's all about.
Yes, the final notes to complement the underlying topic for under which branding works. We're talking about consistency. We're talking about identification. In the next few chapters, we're gonna sessions. Sorry, chapters is with the book, and because we're in the typography session, I had to go back to the physical format. On the next sessions, we're going to talk about the last few remaining points that will enable you to guarantee consistency with the application of your brand. Yeah. Like Chris just brought up, the moment the risk comes into the equation is when a brand owner or a brand or a business owner hands over materials for a marketing company, for a junior, for somebody else other than him, who knows the ins and outs and knows the decisions behind making the typography like it is, the colors be what they are, and the layout having been structured like it has. When that handover happens, there is a step in the middle. There is a step in the middle. No. So next week, we're going to talk about colors and how they tie up everything we've talked about over the last few sessions. And after that session, you're going to want to come in, because we're going to talk about the one piece that maintains brand consistency no matter who picks up the brand to do any sort of work. Should I reveal the name right now, Chris?
Oh, if we're going this far, we may as well. So, yes.
All right. We're talking about a document that is crucial, and we keep emphasizing to our clients to make sure they have created, which is a manual for the brand guidelines. So this is the document that you will be able to hand over to anybody outside yourself, and yourself being the head of the company, to maintain brand consistency. With that, final notes done. I hope you took your notes, and we're looking forward to seeing you on the next live session of Amplify Your Brand.
Cool. And if you have any comments or feedback on anything we talked about today, we would love to have that be sent. And please let us know where you're watching this, as we always like to know where our communications are being heard from and what your feedback is on those. So until next time, thank you everyone for joining us this week on this week's Amplify Your Brand. Take care.